Tyrannosaurus was an elephant-sized apex predator with a bone-crushing bite, eyesight and smell that could track prey from miles away even at night, and a thick, durable skull adapted to battling members of its own monstrous kind. You know it, you love it, you might hate it. But T-Rex didn't exist in a vacuum, and it was part of a long saga of powerful, agile predators that spanned continents and tens of millions of years. The tyrannosauroidea included the elephant-sized, bone-crushing bruisers we all know and love, but contained far more diversity than just osteophagous dragons. From one-tonne knife-snouted sprinters as fast as horses to three-clawed carnivores that hunted in snow, tyrannosauroids found success in different times, climates, and ecological niches. This is the ultimate guide to the Tyrannosauroidea, covering the size, phylogeny, and physiology of every member of prehistory's most iconic theropod group. Tyrannosauroids benefited from a host of evolutionary adaptations that made them successful, all across the northern hemisphere in the late Jurassic and throughout the Cretaceous. These traits allowed them to eventually develop into the most physically powerful land predators in Earth's history, while also occupying their fair share of mesopredator niches across time. And as active carnivores, they needed to have biting weaponry sufficient to cut through and process flesh. The smallest, earliest tyrannosauroids, like the jaguar-sized late Jurassic to early Cretaceous proceratosaurids, had sharp, curved teeth that act like slicing tools to grasp and injure small prey. This primitive form had a long neck and arms that were notably more developed than those of its later, more famous relatives, indicating that proceratosaurids utilized a combination of striking speed, grasping claws, and cutting teeth to take down their targets rather than brute force. Big proceratosaurs like Tyrannus, which lived in early Cretaceous China, experimented with adding bulk to their long-reaching clawed hunter build, reaching over a metric ton at full size and increasing the robusticity of their skulls. We see the first classically Tyrannosaurian skull shape, the spiked hydraulic press, appear about 81.5 million years ago with Lythornax argestes, the gore king of the southern west. Lythornax lived in the Waweep Formation, a coastline environment abundant with freshwater lakes and burgeoning vegetation, and was the oldest true tyrannosaurid known. Its robust skull and body might seem familiar to us now, but that morph was revolutionary for the Cretaceous. Its focus on raw skull power over long claws is likely due to the prey it hunted. The bulky, fast Hadrosaur acrostavis, which required a powerful bite to properly fell, and the living battering ram Diabloceratops, whose high agility, defensive bony frill, and wicked brow horns demanded an answer beyond simple claws. The raw power approach took off from that point on, becoming even more extreme with Thespletosaurus almost immediately after the Gore King's reign had ended. Zhusheng Tyrannus, Tarbosaurus, and Tyrannosaurus itself all followed that same mold, emphasizing couch-sized skulls with railroad-spiked teeth in order to better deal with the prevailing meta of bulky and armored prey. But that wasn't the only way to find success as a tyrannosaur. The Alioramans, a branch from late Cretaceous Asia, were the assassins of the group, built more like knives than maces. Their skulls were long and relatively thin, better suited for snatching small prey in a lightning strike attack than crushing bone, and they focused on speed over strength. Albertosaurians and nanotyrannids met roughly in the middle, with Albertosaurians tending towards size and power, while nanotyrannids were lighter and leaner while still having a bulk advantage over the Alioramans. Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus were actually highlighted alongside Tyrannosaurus as being osteophagous taxa, or bone-eating animals, in a 2017 study. Their bites were so strong they could puncture and fragment the bones of their prey, supplementing their diet of meat with calcium and phosphate salts from inside skeletal remains. They used a bite-and-pull method of hunting and feeding, seizing prey with their incisors and then using their overbuilt neck muscles to retract, ripping out huge chunks of flesh and gouging bone. We see a wide spectrum of successful biting and hunting styles across the Tyrannosauroidea, from the diminutive proceratosaurids to the mid-sized hunters to the megafauna specialists, a dynasty of killers that lasted 100 million years. Yet you don't always have to choose between speed and power. Sometimes you can evolutionarily chase your ceratopsian cake and eat it too. While tyrannosaurs weren't the speed demons as they're sometimes portrayed as in popular media, they were among the fastest groups of theropods thanks to their relatively long lower hind limbs in proportion to their upper hind limbs. Their long lower legs allowed for wider strides, so they could cover more ground in one step than other theropods could in the same time frame. Even the bigger representatives of the clade kept these speed-adapted proportions, but used them differently. A 2026 study led by my homie Adrian used a combination of trackways and biomechanical analyses to find that Tyrannosaurus likely used the front part of its feet when moving quickly, similar to an enormous ostrich. This increased its stride frequency while its limb proportions increased its stride length, giving it higher top speeds compared to other theropods within its size class, in addition to limiting the stress placed upon its legs and letting it move at a decent clip without shattering its legs, contrary to what previous, less holistic studies had concluded 9 years previously. This study observed that this distal first foot striking pattern was likely common among most theropods, but Tyrannosaur's unique leg proportions gave them an advantage even within that framework. While reading his paper, I asked Adrian to clarify the relationship between stride length versus leg proportions for Tyrannosaurs, and here's what he had to say. Yeah, shorter relative stride lengths are the name of the game with T-Rex, and potentially other big theropods, but that needs more work. There is a lot of technical stuff to go into. Namely, longer strides can have some issues with producing a higher contact force, but also swinging a heavy leg takes energy. The thing to note here is that while the relative stride length is short in T-Rex, even young animals are still massive, so a single stride covers a lot of ground. So an adult animal is going to cover 6 to 7 meters with an aerial phase. For comparison, the standing hip height at the acetabulum is about 3.3 meters, and the total leg length is like 3.8 meters. Basically, to move quickly, Rex would just swing its legs more quickly and only somewhat extend the stride. It's pretty consistent with what you see with scaling relationships in birds today. For carnosaurs, it's fairly probable that T-Rex was a bit faster than similarly sized carnosaurs. Limb proportions, etc. are part of the deal, but Tyrannosaurs are also more muscular. And what produces top speed is force generation, i.e. muscle mass. That's probably a longer discussion though. A typical adult 10-ton T-Rex would have moved at about 6 meters a second, or 13.4 miles an hour, while small individuals, say a 7-ton subadult, would be using fancy footwork at 8.5 meters a second or 19 miles an hour. Juvenile Rexes, think 1.4 tons, were the real speed demons at 11.4 meters a second or 25.5 miles an hour, and even they weren't the most cursorially adapted Tyrannosaurs. Nanotyrannus and the Alioramans likely took the podium in that contest, with top speeds potentially in the 30 to 40 mile an hour range. Such extreme capabilities were important developments in the constant arms race between predator and prey, particularly speedy hadrosaurs for the big guys and smaller creatures on the menu for the fast mid-range carnivores. Being able to move quickly in a straight line is one thing, but what if your prey is using evasive maneuvers? That's where Tyrannosaur agility comes into play. Their hip and leg muscles are inordinately large and powerful, and their feet are especially resistant to torsional stress they experience while turning quickly, thanks to specialized ligaments in addition to their arctometatarsaline bone structure. This means that the metatarsals in their foot fold and pinch in the middle, stabilizing the overall structure and increasing both linear speed and turning ability. So not only are they faster compared to other theropods their size, they're better at maneuvering as well. Seems overpowered? It is. Nature isn't fair. That agility and speed were especially important for the tyrannosaurids that hunted big ceratopsians. As brought up in a 2013 analysis by Krause and Robinson, it would have been a viable strategy for Tyrannosaurus to use its own body as a high-impact living battering ram to knock over Triceratops comparable in size to itself, building up momentum and catching its prey by surprise. In case that attack didn't work, the big predator would need to be able to change direction and avoid the meter-long horns of its irritated prey. Speed and agility may have been selected for in tyrannosaur populations for self-defense as well, from each other to be specific. Brown et al. 2022 found facial scars from bites in over 100 tyrannosaurid specimens across 7 species, and concluded that those wounds were far more common in adult specimens than in younger individuals. Their explanation, which I think is fairly reasonable, was that adult tyrannosaurs were more likely to engage in ritual combat over mating rights or territory. However, that isn't the only reason that tyrannosaurs would battle one another. Sometimes, when resources are scarce, even the king of the tyrant lizards becomes the king of the cannibals. According to a 2010 study, 4 different Tyrannosaurus skeletons show evidence of feeding bites from other Tyrannosaurus. The same 2010 study adds that cannibalism was likely common in other theropod genera. In a world where even your own kind is as likely to kill you as the giant spear-faced herbivores or demon duckbills, being agile, fast, and fierce can save your life. Having honed reflexes is also crucial, and a 2009 study based on CT scans of Tyrannosaurus, Gorgosaurus, and Nanotyrannus indicated that Tyrannosaurs had, in the words of the authors, enhanced reflexes coordinating rapid eye and head movements. It is concluded that Tyrannosaur sensory biology is consistent with their predatory Coelurosaurian heritage, with emphasis on relatively quick, coordinated eye and head movements. Tyrannosaurs in general, but especially the more derived varieties, really were hyper-adapted for megatheropod combat, combining strength, speed, offense, agility, and reaction time. T-Rex is Ultra Instinct Goku. Those are the fossil records words, not mine. While 2 giant theropods duking it out is perhaps the coolest thing that's ever happened on prehistoric Earth, from the perspective of a healthy, sane animal, it's better to avoid a fight if possible. One way to do so is territorial avoidance through detection. Tyrannosaurs had excellent senses of smell, with powerful olfactory bulbs that allowed them to pick up the scent of prey and potential rivals from long distances, in addition to a sensitivity to low-frequency sounds that would let them hear the growls and calls of intraspecific opponents from far away, per the same 2009 study that established they had enhanced reflexes relative to non-Coelurosaur theropods. Listening to the signals put out by your opponents and heading the other direction is a great method of saying, hey, I don't want the smoke, at least not right now, but give me a few days to do a training montage, and then I'm gonna bite your pelvis in half and eat your intestines. Something to that effect. Another way is traveling in groups, a behavior that helps keep you safe and improve your rate of hunting success. We have evidence for gregariousness in Eutyrannus, Teratophonius, Daspletosaurus, possibly Tyrannosaurus, and Albertosaurus, the latter of which has a bone bed featuring individuals ranging from near hatchlings to fully grown adults, although bone beds alone may represent predator traps. A 2014 study, however, described a trackway from Canada that preserved 3 medium-sized tyrannosaurs traveling together. In context with those mixed-age groups, it indicates that either pack hunting or family grouping were plausible behaviors for decently large tyrannosaurs in the late Cretaceous, with Eutyrannus pushing it back to the early Cretaceous. Another adaptation that led to the success of tyrannosaurs as powerful hunters across a wide range of body masses is one that isn't unique to them, but is still crucial to discuss. Theropods as a whole appear to have possessed complex bird-like respiratory systems with air sacs, a structural framework that allowed them to always be passing fresh oxygen through their lungs even when exhaling. Rather than breathing in and out all at once, they would store oxygen in an air sac, run part of it through their lungs, and then move the fresh air from the sac to the lung while breathing out. This system is absurdly efficient, and frankly makes other vertebrates feel bad for not having been selected for such an optimized trait. A 2025 study described the avian respiratory system as having exceptional functional superiority among air-breathing vertebrates, with a 2022 study referring to it as the evolutionary zenith. So it's not just me hyping up dinosaurs, which to be fair I am known to do, but only when the data says it's okay. On a practical level, this means that theropods, but in particular tyrannosaurs, thanks to their foot and leg structures in addition to their avian-like respiration, would be able to operate at energetically costly levels of activity for far longer than mammals of comparable body mass. A 100-kilogram ostrich, for example, can maintain high speeds for up to 20 minutes at a time, while a lion of the same mass can only run at such speeds for a few seconds. Arabian endurance horses that have been selectively bred for centuries can keep going for up to 160 kilometers or 100 miles without rest, but at a third of the speed of a casual ostrich. This dichotomy between cursorial theropods and cursorial mammals is partially due to respiratory efficiency and partially due to avian leg structure and footfall patterns, which as discussed earlier seem to be very similar to those employed by tyrannosaurs. Higher masses, of course, would reduce the amount of time an animal can spend at top speed. One-ton Alioramins like Chenjosaurus might be able to sprint at 30 miles an hour for a minute and maintain 20 miles an hour for 5 to 6 minutes. Now that you have a basic understanding of why tyrannosaurs were essentially the Super Saiyans of theropods, let's go through every member of the Tyrannosauroidea and cover their body size, evolutionary relationships to one another, and interesting tidbits about each one. There might be some animals here you're not super familiar with, so comment with what you learn as you're watching. I'd love to hear from you. And as a disclaimer, most recent phylogenies place the Megaraptorans outside of Tyrannosauroidea while still being closely related to it. I've got a whole video just on Megaraptorans if you're interested in spooky, clawed critters. Let's get started with the Jurassic Tyrannosauroids and work our way along the timeline. Proceratosaurus bradleyi is the first Tyrannosauroid known from the fossil record, appearing in the late Jurassic period 166 million years ago, and might not be what you think of when you hear the word Tyrannosaur. It's a Proceratosaurid, a primitive clade within the larger group set apart by traits in the skull and hips. This diminutive predator, known only from a skull, had enormous nostrils and large eyes, indicating that sharp senses were important for both detecting prey and avoiding other predators. Fragments of a sagittal crest remain, a structure that was likely used for display and honest health signaling. Chilescus aristotocus was another Proceratosaurid that lived at the same time as Proceratosaurus itself, but this one was a denizen of Russia rather than England. The material is even more fragmentary in terms of the skull, but there's enough to tell that the classic Proceratosaurid giant nostril look is still active in the genus. Chilescus was also slightly larger than Proceratosaurus, and likely went after bigger prey as a result. Guanlong Wukai lived in China 160 million years ago, representing a later stage of the Proceratosaurid group, and thanks to a decently complete adult and mostly complete youngling, is known from quite solid material. This late Jurassic crown dragon had long arms and claws with a small head and long neck, complete with a display crest on top of its skull that would be hard to miss if you're a rival or a potential mate. The adult and juvenile were actually discovered together, with some speculating that the adult had stomped the juvenile to death before dying itself of unknown causes. I don't know how that'll hold up, but it's an interesting idea. Stoxosaurus clevelandi hops all across the world to the western United States, and is not believed to be a Proceratosaurid. It's a member of the Pan-Tyrannosauria, or all the Tyrannosauroids that aren't Proceratosaurids. Unfortunately, both specimens of Stoxosaurus consist entirely of partial hip bones, so I'm not terribly confident about its identity either way. It was a small animal, no larger than a wolf, and would have darted through the forests of late Jurassic Utah without any clue about the grand dynasty it was part of. Jura Tyrant is another basal pan-tyrannosaur. Probably. Studies go back and forth on whether it's a tyrannosauroid at all, so keep that disclaimer in mind. It lived about 149 million years ago in England and is by far the biggest carnivore we've covered up to this point. It was about the size of a polar bear with a hip height of nearly 2 meters and mass of over 600 kilograms. It's also much more complete than Stoxosaurus, thank goodness, with a decent amount of postcrania preserved to give us a better idea of its overall build. And we're already into the Cretaceous, when Tyrannosauroids really got cooking. Speaking of cooking, I'm going to go warm up a chimichanga. I'll be right back. Right, the Cretaceous. Dilongparadoxus is the oldest Cretaceous tyrannosauroid known, with an approximate date ranging from 130 to 122.5 million years ago. It was a wee little thing, even smaller than its earlier relative Guanlong, but was more closely related to the bear-sized Duratyrant. The most important contribution that Dilong makes to the group is the presence of protofeathers that appear to have covered nearly its entire body, a fuzzy coat that may have helped with insulation or simply been an ontogenetic holdover of ancestral coverings. Scans of its brain case indicate that it was an agile little thing, but didn't have an incredible sense of smell. Those traits, combined with its proportionally enormous eye sockets, indicate, at least to me, that it may have been a nocturnal insect hunter, more concerned with fast movements than prey detection over long distances. Eotyrannus lengi lived right about the same time as Dilong, 127 million years ago, but on what is now the Isle of Wight. It's much larger, at almost 20 times the mass of its Chinese cousin, but appears to have had a broadly similar body structure. While it may only be known from scraps, there are enough bone pebbles from across its body to give us a rough idea of its size and shape, and to tell us that there were pan-tyrannosaurs in Europe in the early Cretaceous. I'm not any happier about the shape this thing is in than you or its discoverers are, but I'm still glad that we've got it. Ecological information is far better than none at all. Eutyrannus wali brings us back to Proceratosaurids, but this sleek apex predator from China was on a different level compared to its ancestors. Eutyrannus is known from 3 exceptionally preserved specimens, a juvenile, subadult, and adult, demonstrating how robusticity and size increased throughout ontogeny. Eutyrannus could almost be mistaken for a later Tyrannosaurid were it not for the 3-clawed hands and enormous arms that betrayed it as a Proceratosaur. The adult was a third heavier than the world record polar bear and had an even nastier bite, all while sporting a coat of feathers. Eutyrannus is in fact the largest feathered animal known from the fossil record, at least the largest animal known to have feathers. Zhongguanlong bimoensis, the dragon of the Grand Pass from White Ghost Castle, was a moderately sized pan-tyrannosaur that lived within the range of 124 to 113 million years ago. It could be considered an evolutionary linchpin or tipping point for the pan-tyrannosaurs. While it wasn't much larger than Eotyrannus, and in fact smaller than the giant Proceratosaurid Eutyrannus, Zhongguanlong has a mixture of primitive and derived features in its skull. Its vertebrae are primitive, and its hips are more derived, making it likely that this animal represents a transitional form towards the cursorial, agile, muscular predators that the general public is familiar with. Sinotyrannus represents the last and by far the biggest of the Proceratosaurids, living from 122 to 120 million years ago and cracking the scales at 1900 kilograms. While more fragmentary than Eutyrannus, it appears to have had a very similar build, with robust hips, a strong, deep-snouted skull, and wicked hand claws. Some paleontologists argue that Sinotyrannus is simply the adult form of the small theropod Waschianathus, and that many compsognaathids are simply immature individuals of other larger animals. I think we need more Sinotyrannus material to be sure. Timaimus hermanii is a big question mark. It's a theropod from Australia, which is very cool. It's only known from 2 isolated femurs, which is not cool. Originally thought to be an ornithomimid, it's now strongly suspected to have vague tyrannosauroid affinities. There's not much else to say about the wolf-sized animal considering its sketchy remains, but it's certainly worth mentioning. Electrosaurus ulcinide lived in Mongolia, somewhere in the gap between 102 and 89.6 million years ago, pending more precise dating on the stratum it was found in. It's here that we really begin to see the long-legged tyrannosaurs take metaphorical flight. Despite being the size of a large bear, Electrosaurus wasn't the biggest theropod in its environment, not by a long shot. That title belonged to the Candonathid gigantoraptor, a 2-ton chicken parrot that was 3 meters tall at the hip and could have looked a giraffe in the eye when fully grown. Electrosaurus may have preyed upon young Gigantoraptor if given the opportunity, but the day in which Tyrannosaurs become the undisputed biggest theropods of their environment has yet to arrive. I have to admit that I'd forgotten entirely about Moros intrepidus, possibly because it's only known from isolated teeth and a single damaged leg. It was a small animal by Tyrannosauroid standards, but it's significant thanks to what it portends. Moros is the first Tyrannosauroid from North America, given the name Impending Doom to reference how it foreshadows the beginning of a dynasty that would eventually replace the Carcharodontosaurids on the continent. The dragon prince, Conculu mongoliensis, is one of the streamlined pan-tyrannosaurs that would be most dangerous to a time-traveling human. Living roughly 94 to 84 million years ago, it had more teeth and a smoother skull than later-derived tyrannosaurs, but already had the high-speed capability that made it able to chase and take down the fleet-footed pachycephalosaurs and ornithomimids it lived with. My guess is that it dabbled in young therizinosaurids as well, competing with a large dromaeosaurid, a chilobator, for big, slow prey. As nimble and fast as Conculu may have been, it was only the forerunner for specialized speed demon tyrannosaurs that were enabled by a trend beginning with Suskityrannus, the arctometatarsaling condition, where the two outer metatarsals squeeze the central one towards the proximal part of the foot. You may recall that this condition increases both linear speed and resistance to torsion, enabling tyrannosaurs past this point to go even faster without tripping over themselves when they try to turn. That all started with this little guy. Timurlengia keeps the timeline rolling, living 92 to 90 million years ago in Uzbekistan. The lion-sized animal preserved a brain case that helped magnify our understanding of tyrannosaur senses. As it turned out, their keen hearing, as well as eyesight and olfactory abilities, evolved before they became gigantic, not the other way around as long thought. Timurlengia was setting up a ridiculous suite of apex predator traits that helped itself survive, but also gave its later relatives the edge they needed to become the most physically powerful land carnivores in Earth's history, all while flying under the radar of the Carcharodontosaurid Ulugbegosaurus that dominated Uzbekistan at the time. Appalachosaurus montgomeryensis is, as you likely surmised, from the exotic climes of the eastern United States, with remains found in Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolinas. Whether or not it's merely a eutyrannosaur or a true tyrannosaurid depends on the study you're reading at the moment, or even the part of the study. The bombshell 2025 paper on Nanotyrannus by Zano and Napoli ran multiple analyses that included Appalachosaurus, with one indicating it was outside of Eutyrannosauria entirely, and the other placing it as a nanotyrannid eutyrannosaur. Either way, Appalachosaurus was a large predator, with the only specimen, a subadult, comfortably in the grizzly to polar bear size range. Projected adults would likely weigh about a ton. Finally, we reach the peak of theropoddom, the Tyrannosauridae, the derived tyrannosauroids that have captured public fascination for over a century. Lythornax argestes, the gore king of the southern west, remains the oldest tyrannosaurid known from the fossil record as of the writing of this video. I love Lythornax. I've visited the museum that it stored at many times as a teenager living near Salt Lake, and the channel logo is a Lythornax skull. Its wide posterior skull gave it a menacing look and an even more menacing bite, and scan-based 3D modeling indicates it weighed roughly 1.7 metric tons, introducing the Tyrannosauridae with a bang. Dynamoterror dynastes is one of those edgelord taxa, animals given insane names just because. It's not a bad thing, just observing. The holotype is total crap, but there are publicly viewable remains referred to the genus that are notably better. It seems to have been a 1.4 to 3 ton hunter that essentially owned New Mexico during its time. The Natothyristes, another recently described Campanian tyrannosaurid, keeps the trend of heavy metal band names. The Natothyristes means Death Harvester or Reaper of Death. It's a cool name, but I wish it had been saved for an animal known for more than scraps of the skull. The holotype is pretty trashed here. Too bad. Daspletosaurus turosus, thank goodness, is much more well preserved, known from at least 4 different specimens from Canada. It lived somewhere around 79 to 77 million years ago and is the largest animal we've covered on the list so far. Remember the little Proceratosaurid from a few minutes ago? This 3-ton beast is him now. Feel old yet? Daspletosaurus continues the robusticity trend that Lythornax began, with thick serrated teeth, a robust body and skull, and a body the size of an Indian elephant. Sir William is the nickname given to an undescribed species of Tyrannosaurid, one with a more slender build compared to Daspletosaurus. It was thought to be a dasp at first, until further analysis revealed it had some more derived traits in common with Stratophonius. Stay tuned for more. Gorgosaurus libratus, the gorgeous Gorgonsaurus, was big, fast, agile, and known from an incredible amount of fairly complete specimens, giving us great knowledge about its anatomy and lifestyle. Various excellently preserved Gorgosaurus individuals provide evidence that Tyrannosaur ribs were pointing down rather than being dramatically backswept, which ended the era of emaciated Tyrannosaur reconstructions. For most people. Skin impressions of Gorgosaurus from various parts of the body demonstrate a scaly texture for the skin, but the hunt for feathered large Tyrannosaurs still continues for those true believers out there. As mentioned in the earlier section on gregariousness and behavior, Teratophonius curii has a mixed age group to its name discovered in southwestern Utah, ranging from very young to subadult individuals. A 2021 paper estimated a projected adult size at 8.7 meters, which is quite large compared to even the biggest known specimens, but hey, they're the experts on the animal. I'll happily take another 3-ton Tyrannosaurid from my collection. Daspletosaurus wilsoni is currently controversial. One group of Tyrannosaur researchers argues that it represents an intermediate stage between Daspletosaurus, Turosus, and Horneri, while others question the stratigraphy and morphology involved in such a claim. I'm not here to tell you what to believe about contested Tyrannosaur phylogeny, mostly, but I can provide the link to the relevant studies in the pinned comment so you can form your own opinion. Pistachi eversor, another southwestern United States tyrannosaur, lived 75.5 to 74.5 million years ago in the Hunter-Wash Formation of New Mexico. It's known from 4 specimens, which is awesome, and they're even across multiple life stages. It had more teeth than usual for tyrannosaurs and an extra lightweight but still robust skull, seemingly taking the carcharodontosaurid route without sacrificing its heavy-set build and strong bite. Whether or not it's a tyrannosaurid proper depends on who you ask, but it seems by the Campanian the North American members of the group had settled into a broadly consistent form of long legs, deep skull, short arms, and crushing spike teeth. Pistachi eversor would have hunted the fearsome herbivore Pentaceratops, adding another chapter to the brutal saga of Tyrannosaur vs. Ceratopsian. Apollonius, the Hunter-Wash Tyrant, was described but not given a scientific name of its own in early 2026. It's only known from a single giant tibia, so kudos to Longrich for not naming a taxon off scrap. If you scale from Tyrannosaurus, then Apollonius would have been between 5.4 and 6.8 tons. Absolutely enormous for the Campanian. Whether Apollonius represents a new taxon or a gigantic specimen of Pistachi eversor is unknown. If it's the latter, it would represent an individual nearly twice as massive as the next largest specimen. Either way, it's probably going on the 2026 edition of the Megatheropod Roundup. Finally, Daspletosaurus horneri shows up. It's a sleek and powerful predator independent of it potentially being descended from Daspletosaurus wilsoni. Known from the 2 Metis information, D. horneri was found in a bone bed of 3 individuals that may or may not indicate gregarious behavior. It's smaller than Daspletosaurus turosus, right about the same size category as the much earlier Lythronax, which makes you wonder what selective pressure was causing these bulky tyrannosaurs to shrink for once, instead of eating steroids for breakfast. The El Gallo tyrannosaur from roughly 72 million years ago is a mystery. It's only known from 2 femurs found in Mexico and measured in 1998, and they're huge for the time period. The smaller of the 2 specimens, Paco, had a femur just under a meter long, comparable to many Daspletosaurus individuals, while the larger femur, Gregorio, measured 1.16 meters long and had a minimum circumference of 504 millimeters. Scaling from Daspletosaurus, these 2 indeterminate specimens indicate masses of 2.8 and 5.5 metric tons respectively, with Gregorio breaking into megatheropod territory millions of years before Tarbosaurus and Tyrannosaurus showed up. Whether these remains represent their own genus, species, or simply fragmentary giants of already described taxa, it's clear that Mexico has many more secrets about tyrannosaurs that need to be revealed. We're already at 73.5 million years ago and headed over to China for Zhusheng Tyrannus magnus. Described in 2011 from a partial skull, this bulky tyrannosaurian languished in relative obscurity for over a decade, until my friend Zheng Chu and his team began redescribing the animal. Some photos and measurements got prematurely leaked and classically misinterpreted by the Chinese national press, so the team had me make a video last year to clear things up. The basics, out of the things I'm allowed to say publicly, is that there are quite a few referred specimens of Zhusheng Tyrannus, several of which are considerably larger than an already elephant-sized holotype, and even overlap with T-Rex itself in terms of sheer mass. It lived alongside and may have hunted the titanic hadrosaur Shantungosaurus, which as an adult was about the size of a small house, and I recommend paying very close attention to Paleo News in 2027. This section of the video is already outdated, but I'm not allowed to say why. Nanuqsaurus hoglandi, at 73 million years old, was famous for years as the dwarf polar tyrannosaur. It's still polar, known from formations in Alaska, and lived in a cold forest environment comparable to subarctic regions today. Its status as a miniature tyrant, however, was dismantled when further specimens were found that indicated its full size was up to 7 meters long and 1,500 kilograms. Hardly a shrimp by any reasonable measurement. The polar bear lizard likely hunted northern ceratopsians like Pachyrhinosaurus and may have even experienced the joy of hunting in snow. Labocania anomala sucks. I'm sorry, I hate to rag on a Mexican tyrannosaur, but it's true. Labocania's material is just bone pebbles. It's so sad, even if it does tell us that there was a 2-ton tyrannosaur running around Mexico 73 million years ago. Fortunately, there's another species. Surely it has better material. Nope, Labocania aguillone is just as bad. There's at least 2 specimens this time, but one of them has essentially been through a hydraulic press, and the other supposedly giant individual is a fragment of a dentary. Y'all know how I feel about dentary scaling, and it is not positive, even for tyrannosaurs. Moving on. Now, Albertosaurus sarcophagus I feel great about. This thing is awesome, and kicks off the Maastrichtian with a roar. The beautiful animal is known from dozens of specimens, over 20 of which were found together in what is called the Dry Island Bone Bed. This mixed age group is frequently cited as potential evidence for gregariousness in the taxon, together with Daspletosaurus and Teratophonius groups. Albertosaurus had over 60 teeth, reinforced chompers that resisted fractures when feeding, and used them against prey and one another. They weren't strangers to cannibalism or fighting, a behavior that led to the spread of parasites across populations. That behavior was likely true for other Tyrannosaur species as well. On to Tyrannosaurus, but not the Tyrannosaurus you're most familiar with. Tyrannosaurus macraensis is a fragmentary giant from the Hall Lake Formation of New Mexico, described only 2 years ago as of this video's recording. The remains, while sparse, are enormous, indicating an animal roughly in the 8 to 9 ton range and implying that Tyrannosaurus as a genus may have its origins in the southwestern United States. However, the age of the Hall Lake Formation has recently been moved to the Maastrichtian thanks to people actually getting radiometric dating samples, so TMAC is likely not as old as originally thought. Dryptosaurus takes us on a detour away from Tyrannosauridae back into the outlands of the simple Tyrannosauria. This eastern genus had longer arms than its bigger relatives, complete with wicked hand claws reminiscent of a Megaraptoran's. Its highly serrated or zyphodont teeth were totally unlike the railroad spike models of the Tyrannosaurids, indicating that it relied on cutting and speed rather than raw power. Nanotyrannus lancensis may have been one of the fastest terrestrial theropods of all time. Its validity as a taxon was debated for decades until a recent paper demonstrated a 100% complete specimen that was shown to be histologically mature and morphologically different from young Tyrannosaurus, which it had been broadly lumped into by the majority of paleontologists up until that point. Nanotyrannus lancensis is from the Lower Hell Creek Formation and likely competed with young T-Rex individuals, hunting young, fast hadrosaurs and caninathids. Its legs were extremely long and built for running quickly, and its skull was elongated without sacrificing biting power. This animal could still gouge bone. Nanotyrannus lithaeus was slightly younger from the Upper Hell Creek, and even bigger, indicating that perhaps some selective pressure caused greater body size to become advantageous while competing with T-Rex. The exact phylogenetic position of Nanotyrannus as a genus is still undergoing research, with the 2025 analyses placing it in its own family Nanotyrannidae within the Tyrannosauria. One tree had all the Nanotyrannus specimens in the family together with Moros intrepidus, while the paper's other proposed phylogeny resulted in Appalachosaurus, Dryptosaurus, and Nanotyrannus all together. More research is coming on these remarkable specimens, so expect our understanding of the cheetah of the late Cretaceous to change even further. Nanotyrannus wasn't the only speedster tyrannosaur of the Maastrichtian. Chenjosaurus sinensis adopted a similar body plan in China, living at the same time but with adaptations for taking on smaller prey. Chenjosaurus had a long, thin snout and was incapable of generating the bone-crushing bites of its relatives, likely preferring to focus on fish and small terrestrial vertebrates. By small, I mean about the size of an adult human. Its top speed was in excess of 30 miles an hour, so quite a few animals would have been on the menu. Alioramus remotus was a close relative of Chenjosaurus while being notably smaller, although to be fair, Alioramus is only known from juveniles and subadults. But the Chenjosaurus holotype wasn't fully grown either, so we'll call it a draw. Alioramus remotus shared the long skull of its relative but had more of a nasal ridge, giving it a unique spiked look. Alioramus altai was even smaller, at least based on the specimens we have, and its snout wasn't as spiky as that of Alioramus remotus. It's known from significantly more complete remains than the other species though, which is a boon for paleoartists. Using related species to fill in the gaps of a given taxon only works if the relatives in question have decent material themselves after all, and this specimen makes it easier to reconstruct any one of the 3 known Alioramans. There is a significant chance that the recently described Asiatyrannus is just a juvenile Tarbosaurus, mirroring the Nanotyrannus versus T-Rex debate of yesteryear. The thing is that this lion-sized predator has been histologically examined, and the paleontologists on either side of the debate can't agree about what the cross-sections of the bones mean. The team that described it insists it was fully grown and represents a dwarf Tyrannosaurian, while other researchers write that the histology reflects a very young individual. I'd recommend taking the genus with a grain of salt for now, but we'll see how that advice ages. Speaking of Tarbosaurus, it's Tarbosaurus. This phenomenal animal is known from over 100 specimens, although the majority aren't described and have been lounging in collections or private hands for decades. It was the elephant-sized apex predator of the Nemegt Formation in late Cretaceous Mongolia, with the largest specimens in the 6-ton range according to 3D modeling of rigorous skeletal reconstructions. Tarbosaurus hunted as a megafaunal generalist, taking down sauropods, dinochyrids, hadrosaurs, therizinosaurs, and ankylosaurs alike, functioning as an extremely successful jack-of-all-trades carnivore that could go toe-to-toe with the most dangerous herbivores of its region. Its robust ribcage and powerful limbs supported its heavily muscled body as it used its bite, agility, and speed to dominate the Namek Formation. While Asia Tyrannus has a solid chance of being its own thing, Raptor Rex craigsteini is more likely than not a juvenile Tarbosaurus. It's known from an incredibly well-preserved juvenile skeleton, but it turned out that the characters used to set it apart as its own genus in its original description are also found in young Tarbosaurus, and it was 3 years old at time of death instead of a subadult. We don't know exactly where the holotype was found, which makes figuring out its original time period difficult, but morphologically, its case for unique status appears to be weak. Now, don't get me wrong. Evolution doesn't have a destination or ultimate goal, but I can understand why some people think it does when they look at Tyrannosaurus rex. This was the most massive and physically powerful land predator known from the fossil record based on specimens uncovered so far, and it makes sense why. A 2012 study found that its tooth structure was ideal for pinning powerful struggling prey, an important trait to have when you're hunting 5-tonned Montosaurus and 7 to 8-ton Triceratops. And a 2004 study indicated that its skull was great at absorbing shock during feeding in order to promote bone longevity. Its jaws could open up to 63.5 degrees and had their maximum bite effectiveness at 28 degrees, an angle that allowed them to rip the frills off giant ceratopsians in order to get at the juicy meat under the armor. Tyrannosaurus rex is known from nearly as many specimens as Tarbosaurus, giving us a wide biogeographic range from Canada to Mexico, and had the strongest bite of any land animal known. With such an impressive resume, it's no wonder why T-Rex has cemented itself as the dinosaur, the tyrant lizard king that truly deserves its title. Tyrannosauroids might be my favorite theropod group, but there were plenty of other prehistoric animals that were just as cool. You can check out the other episodes of this series on my channel. If you like carcharodontosaurids, megaraptorans, sharks, spiders, pliosaurs, pseudosuchians, etc., we've got that too. If you appreciate the work I'm doing and would like to support the channel further, you can consider joining the channel at the Megatheropod level to gain early access to videos. Another way is to purchase, and ideally read and enjoy, my epic fantasy novel Extinction Obsidian Dawn, which is about an Aztec warrior psychically bonded to a Utah raptor who has to defend his home against a Carthaginian invasion of Carcharodontosaurus. I'm about 2/3 of the way through the second book, so ideally that'll be out by the end of 2026. I want to really make sure I'm taking my time to get the sequel right so it'll live up to the expectations of those who've already read Obsidian Dawn. I'm the Vividen, and I'll see you the next time I get absurdly excited about prehistoric animals.